Hello there, this is Dr. Lee Zeitz, and I'd like to introduce you to how to write an introduction. Hello there, this is Lee Zeitz, and I'd like to talk to you about writing an introduction for literature review. Now, I have listed down here 7 different elements on writing an introduction. So let's go through it. I'm going to go through it with you, and then I'd like to show you some examples. Now, first of all, when you start out, your introduction, your first paragraph should be something that really captures your reader's interest. And that would be something, you could have a story, you could talk about important statistics, you could have whatever. But you want to make it so that's something that's going to capture their interest. And once you've done that, in some cases you might want to start about with the purpose of the review. Now, the purpose of the review is talking, why in the heck did you do this? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? I mean, what are the conditions that make it a good idea for you to do this? And so then what you do is you talk about let's say that you're writing about makerspaces. If it turns out that over 50% of the classrooms in the United States have makerspaces, we should probably take a look to see what the research says about whether they work. So the idea is to identify the importance of the problem. This is an important one because we want to make sure that people aren't wasting time. Define the scope of the review. That has to do with, are you doing elementary? Are you doing secondary? In some cases, you may even start out and you could say something about how, well, I started out looking for information on this for elementary, but there really wasn't enough, so I expanded it to K-12, or I expanded it to elementary and middle school. The next one is, explain why this analysis is appropriate. Now, you've already talked about the purpose of your review. You've talked about the importance of the problem that we talk, and then the appropriateness of it has to do with, you want to take this into the next level where you're looking at what are the different aspects of this topic, say makerspaces. So we want to take a look at, why is it an appropriate thing to do this analysis. Next, we take a look at how this could be applied. Once this has been identified and you've actually gone out and done the review, you can take the results of this and apply those by using makerspaces in a way that is most beneficial based upon the research. Then we get into identifying terms. Now, if you only have 1 or 2 terms, you might be able to do it within a paragraph. But if you have multiple terms that you think are important, we talk about makerspaces, we talk about different aspects of that, maybe gross motor, or whatever you might be including in there. If you think that that's something that maybe not everybody would understand, then what you want to do is you want to list them, you want to put in the definition, and then you want to cite it as to where you got that information. One good idea would be that you have someone who doesn't necessarily know a lot about your topic read your paper, and then you can go back and anything that they didn't understand, you can put those into your terms. Now, of course, that's not something you can't do until after you've written the paper. But I'm just saying that you put in the words that you think that are important, and then you can always expand it later on. Finally, then what you do is you list the research themes that you've identified. You've gone out, you've taken a look at the research. You said that I'm looking at makerspaces, and I could be talking about maybe there's different aspects of makerspaces. We have some makerspaces where they're really using a lot of tools, and other makerspaces where we're talking about sewing machines and 3D printers and those sorts of things. And we have the other situation where it's not quite as sophisticated, but it could be that the materials that they have there can still be used to develop good ideas. So anyway, what you do is identify the themes that you have found in the research, and then you address each one. Please remember that what you'll be doing in your writing is that you're going to identify these themes, and then each of those themes would be used as a header as you go through and talk about the research. Okay, so we've gone through those 7. Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, here's some examples. This first one has to do with the efficacy of assistive technology in schools. You'll start out and notice it says, imagine yourself sitting in your language arts class as a high school student. You've been assigned to read a story. There are a few questions to answer about the writing, and the teacher in the front of the class drones about the importance of critical thinking when you evaluate what the writer is trying to relay. Just one problem: you can't make sense of the words. So in other words, they're setting this up. This is definitely something that's going to capture my attention, and it starts out with a story. The second paragraph is one where you've got the story already, and now the idea is that they're going to be talking about some of the importance. In some cases you're going to be using research that would support the need. You might talk about statistics. How many students are considered learning disabled or have a learning disability. I mean, this is where you bring in information from the outside to show the importance of what you're doing. So let's go to the purpose. Now, the purpose of the review is, in this case, is to examine the efficacy of assistive technology. It's important that your reader knows what the purpose is. I think that it's a good idea to try to make sure that your purpose is on the front page, maybe on the second page, but if you get into the third or fourth page and you haven't identified why you're doing this, well, then your reader is going to be lost. So make sure that they understand what the purpose is. Secondly, we talk about the importance. It is crucial to know how much impact the AT and UDL measures have when in schools. Over here, we're talking about the scope, and here we talk about what kinds of applications for this work. For the review once it's done. And then down here they're talking about some themes. Now in this case the 3 themes have been put into paragraph form, which is okay. You could also do it so they're listed. You'll notice that there's no vocabulary in this one. I'm suggesting that you should include that. In this case there wasn't one. So I have one more example for you. It's called The Effectiveness of Ultrasound Training in a Simulation Enhanced Environment. Now this is one where we're going to be taking a look at the research that says, identifies this success of actually using simulations rather than the real thing for ultrasound training. So the very first paragraph is not really a story, but it's one that it talks about the need. And it sets the stage, it identifies the need, and that this may be the solution. The second paragraph, you'll notice it down here, they're talking about the purpose. Over here they're talking about why it's valuable. Here they're talking about the scope, and you'll notice that it says that the scope of the project was limited to studying undergraduate diagnostic medical students. At this level, studies at this level were limited, so the scope was expanded to include medical residents and physicians. So in other words, they're talking about how this is where we started, but then we decided to include medical residents and physicians because we wanted to have enough research to actually make this reasonable and useful. Now we get into the themes, and then finally, this sentence right here probably isn't that important, but they use this as a close for the introduction. And closes are good. So we've gone over this. I've talked about the 7 elements, and I went through and showed you a couple examples. All of this is accessible through your RWLD page, and I hope things go well for you. If you have any questions, please contact me, and we'll make it right. We'll make it work. Thanks.